I came home from 31 years in the army, found out my only son was marrying a woman I had never once laid eyes on. So I put on a pair of ratty work pants and told her I was the gardener. And 8 weeks later she was standing on that front lawn in a wedding dress with a sheriff's deputy holding her by the elbow. And hey, before I get going, I do want to say thank you for sitting down with me today. That means more to me than you'd guess. Do me a favor while you're here. Put the city you're listening from in the comments, because I read every one of them, and I'll call it out by name next time around. And if the story lands with you, that like and that subscribe button are pretty much the whole engine that keeps this little channel running. All right. So, my name's Dale. I did 31 years, most of it in the 3rd Infantry Division out of Fort Stewart, and I came off my last deployment in March at 58 years old with a bad shoulder, a hearing aid I refused to wear, and a duffel bag that had my whole life in it, which is a real humbling thing to notice at the baggage claim in Hartsfield. My son Nathan is 33. He's smarter than me by a country mile. When he was 9, he took apart my truck radio and put it back together better than it came. His mama Robin passed when he was 15. Ovarian. Went fast, which people say like it's a mercy, and it is not a mercy, it just means you don't get to say the things you meant to say. So it was me and Nate. Except it was mostly not me. Because the army doesn't care that your kid is 15 and just lost his mother. He got raised half by my sister Charlene in Snellville and half by a phone card. I know exactly what that cost him. He never once threw it in my face, and honestly I wish he had because I could have taken it. Nate built some kind of software that trucking companies use to find their trailers. A bigger company bought it 4 years ago, and now my son lives in a house in Buckhead off West Paces Ferry with a gate at the end of the driveway, and he still calls me Sunday nights. Or he did, right up until about 11 months ago when the calls started getting short. I noticed. You notice. He'd be on the phone and there'd be somebody in the room with him. I could hear it in his voice, that flattening out. He'd say, "Yeah, Dad. Yep, okay, Dad. Love you. Gotta go. 6, 7 minutes." That was it. And then in January, he sent me a text. He goes, "Hey, big news, I'm engaged." That's it. That's the whole message, my only child. A text message that came in while I was standing in a chow line with sand in my teeth. I typed back like 11 different things and deleted all of them and finally sent, "Congratulations, son. Tell me about her." And he sent a picture. Pretty girl, blonde, in front of a fountain somewhere, real white teeth. Said her name was Brooke. That was all I got. Brooke. I asked when the wedding was. He said May. I said, "May of this year?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Son, I'm not back till the end of March." And he goes, "I know, it's fine. We've got it handled. Now you tell me how that's supposed to sit in a man's chest for 2 months, 8,000 miles from home. Because I turned that thing over every night on my rack. He didn't ask me to be there. He didn't ask me to stand up with him. He didn't ask me one thing. He told me, like I was a co-worker who needed to know about a schedule change. And here's the part I couldn't get past. My boy is not like that. Whatever else you want to say about how I raised him or didn't raise him, that kid has never in his life been careless with people. He is the guy who sends a thank you note. So either my son had changed into somebody else in 11 months, or somebody had gotten in between us. I decided I was going to find out which. And the way I decided to find out is the part where you're going to think I'm crazy, and yeah, I know how it sounds. So I get back stateside March 29th. I don't call him. I get a room at a Days Inn out by the airport for a week because I couldn't face Charlene's questions yet. And I sat in that room with the AC rattling and I looked up my son's fiancée. Brooke Danvers. That's the name he gave me. There's a Facebook private, there's an Instagram, and the Instagram is where I started getting that itch in the back of my neck, the same itch I had in Ramadi. About 900 pictures on there, and every single one of them was from the last 2.5 years. Nothing before that. No high school friends tagging her in old photos, no aunt commenting, "Bless you, baby." It's like she got dropped on this earth fully grown in the fall of 2022, wearing a nice dress at a rooftop bar. And there was a guy in a lot of them. Big fella, real tan, hair slicked back. And every caption he's in says my brother Trevor. Trevor Danvers. Except in one picture from Sea Island 1, he's got his hand on her hip, not around her shoulder. Her hip, with his thumb tucked into the waistband of her skirt. Brothers don't do that. Now hold on, I know that's thin. A man can drive himself insane off one photograph. I told myself that. But I've spent 3 decades learning to trust the thing that itches, because the times I ignored it are the times I've still got scars from. So here's what I did. Nate's got a landscaping crew that comes Tuesdays and Fridays. I know that because he complained about them one time on the phone. Said they blow the grass clippings into the pool and he's got to fish them out. Little Nolan Brothers outfit out of Chambly. I drove over to their yard on a Monday morning in a rented Silverado, and I found the owner, Pete Nolan, 60-some years old, eating a sausage biscuit off the tailgate. And I told him the truth. All of it. I said, "My son lives at this address. I've been gone 31 years. He's marrying a woman in 6 weeks that I've never met, and I've got a feeling in my gut. And I'm asking you to let me stand behind a mower on your crew for a couple weeks so I can look at her with my own 2 eyes." Pete chewed on that biscuit a long minute. Then he said, "My brother did 2 tours in Vietnam and came home to a wife who'd sold his truck." He handed me a shirt. Green polo, Nolan Brothers on the chest, smelled like gasoline and somebody else's sweat. Now the funny thing is that it worked immediately. Nobody looked at me. I'm a 58-year-old man in a green polo pushing a wheelbarrow, and I became furniture, invisible in about 4 seconds flat. 31 years I wore a uniform that made people stand up straighter in a room, and I put on a different uniform, and I turned into a hedge. First Tuesday, Nate wasn't even there. He was in Dallas. So I got the run of the property, and it about knocked the wind out of me. Stone house, slate roof, circle driveway with a fountain in it. There's a pool house bigger than the place Robin and I brought him home to in Hinesville. And I'm standing there with a bag of mulch on my shoulder thinking, my kid built that, and I wasn't there for 1 single day of it. Part of me was proud, and part of me was so lonesome on that grass I could have sat down and cried like a child. Both things at the same time. That's just how it is. Second Tuesday is when I met her. I was on my knees at the front beds pulling out these dead knockout roses somebody had let go to hell, and I hear heels on the stone. I look up and there she is, and I'll give her this much. She's beautiful, exactly like the pictures. Coffee in one hand and a phone in the other. And she stops about 6 feet from me and looks at the beds. She goes, "Are you the one who's been doing this?" I said, "Doing what, Mom?" She points at the roses with her coffee cup. She goes, "This. It looks like a graveyard." I said, "Mom, they were dead when I got here. I'm taking them out so I can put something in that'll live." And she looks at me for the first time, right at my face. And she smiles, and she goes, "Well, aren't you an optimist?" That's all it was that first day. She went inside, and I sat back on my heels and I thought, okay, she's cold. Cold isn't a crime. My own mother was cold as a well handle, and she'd have walked through fire for me. I almost let it go. I sat in that Days Inn that night with a gas station sandwich and damn near talked myself into calling my son, telling him congratulations, and putting the green shirt in the trash. Then Friday came. Friday I was out front again, setting in the new roses. Hot day for April, that sticky Georgia hot where your shirt's soaked by 10 in the morning. And she comes out and she's got the phone up to her ear and she's pacing on the driveway, and I guess she'd decided I was furniture too, because she didn't lower her voice one bit. She goes, "No, Trev, listen to me, listen. The dad is back. He's back in the country, Nathan told me last night." I did not move. I want to tell you I stayed cool, and on the outside I did. My hands kept putting dirt around that rose like nothing was happening, but my heart was going like a hammer. She goes, I know. No, he's some career army guy. He's got nothing. He's been living in a tent for 30 years. Trevor, he has nothing. That's the whole point. Pause. She goes, because Nathan gets weird about him, that's why. He gets that voice. He gets soft. I've got everything lined up perfect, and I'm not having some broke old soldier show up here and start crying about how proud he is and get inside Nathan's head 6 weeks out. And then she laughed, and she said, I'll handle it. I always handle it. She hung up, and she stood there for a second, and then she turned around and looked right at me. And here is where my whole life turned on a hinge, right there on that driveway with my knees in the dirt. She walks over. She's got that phone tapping against her leg, and she goes, Hey, what's your name? I said, Dale, ma'am. She goes, Dale? Do you want to make some money, Dale? I said, Ma'am, everybody wants to make some money. And she smiled at that. She liked that. She thought she'd found her guy. And she crouched down, all the way down, on her heels in that expensive dress, so she could be eye level with the help. And she said it. She said, There's an old man who's going to come to this house sometime in the next few weeks. Nathan's father. 60-ish, probably looks like he sleeps in his truck. When he shows up, he's not getting through that gate. You call me first. Not Nathan, not the house. Me. And I'll take care of you. I said, Take care of me how? And she goes, 5,000 cash. And there's more after the wedding if he stays gone. $5,000 to keep a father away from his only son's wedding. She looked me in my face and offered me $5,000 to keep me away from me. And you know what I did? I said, Yes, ma'am. You got it. Because I've been in rooms where the whole thing depends on whether you can keep your face still. And this was one of those rooms. It just happened to be a flower bed. She stood up, brushed her hands off like she'd touched something, and went inside. I finished the row. Every rose. Took me 2 more hours and I don't remember a minute of it. Then I drove to the Publix on Peachtree and sat in the parking lot 45 minutes without turning the engine off, just sitting there in the cold air. Now, everybody I've told this to says the same thing. They go, Dale, why didn't you just walk in the house that day? Take the shirt off. Say surprise. I'm the broke old soldier. Here's what your bride just offered me on the driveway. Believe me, I wanted to. I wanted it so bad my teeth hurt. But I know my son. If I walk in there with no proof and a story, what happens? She cries. She says the gardener misunderstood. She says the old man's confused. He's been in a war zone, honey. He came home and put on a costume and snuck around your house. Does that sound like a well man to you? And she'd be holding his hand while she said it. And Nate would have to choose, on the spot, between the woman in his house and the father who wasn't there for 18 years. I have not earned that choice. I know exactly what I've got in the bank with that boy, and it is not enough to spend on a maybe. So no. She was going to hand me the rope herself. She'd already started. That night I called a guy, Dewey Kessler, retired Fulton County, does private work now. I got his name off a master sergeant I served with. Dewey's about 70, and he talks so slow you want to reach in and pull the words out of his mouth. I told him what I had. He was quiet a long time, and then he goes, Son, I'm gonna need a middle name and a date of birth, and there ain't gonna be one. He was right. There wasn't one. Nate didn't know his fiancée's middle name. I found that out later, and it still makes me sick. But Dewey got clever. He couldn't work her, so he worked Trevor. Trevor Danvers had a Georgia driver's license, which means a real photo on a real record, and he had a DUI in Cobb County in 2019. And on that DUI paperwork, listed as his emergency contact spouse, was a woman named Brianna Cobb. Brianna Cobb. Out of Macon. Dewey pulled her up, and I got the photograph on my phone at 10 o'clock at night sitting on the end of a motel bed, and I want to tell you what that felt like. Darker hair, heavier, maybe 8, 9 years younger, but it's her. Same nose, same chin, same little gap in the front teeth she'd fixed. It was her. And Brianna Cobb had a record. A plea in Bibb County in 2016. Financial transaction card fraud, first offense. She pled it down and did probation. And Brianna Cobb had a marriage license, filed in Houston County, Alabama, October of 2018, to Trevor Danvers. And Dewey checked. He checked 3 separate ways over 4 days, and there was no divorce. Nowhere. Not Alabama, not Georgia, not anywhere Dewey could find, and Dewey can find things. My son's fiancée was already married, to her brother, who was not her brother. I sat there and I laughed, out loud, alone, in a Days Inn. It's the kind of laugh that isn't funny, because if you don't laugh at a thing like that, you'll put your fist through the drywall, and it wasn't my drywall. All right, so now I've got something. But I'm gonna be straight with you, it still wasn't enough, and here's why. A man can love a woman so hard he'll rebuild reality to keep her. I've watched grown soldiers do it. She could say Trevor lied on that form. She could say the Alabama thing was a mess she thought got handled. She could cry. And she is real good at crying, I'd find that out. I needed her to say it herself, in her voice, where nobody could tell my boy the old man misunderstood. And I want to be clear about something. Georgia's a one-party consent state. Dewey told me that. Then his lawyer buddy told me that. And I asked twice because I did not want to hand her a single thing to swing back at me. If I'm in the conversation, I can record the conversation. That's it. So I bought a little recorder at the Best Buy on Piedmont, $40, and I put it in the chest pocket of that green Nolan Brothers polo behind the stitching. And then I did the hardest thing I've ever done in a war or out of one. I went back to work. 3 more weeks. I mowed my son's grass. I edged his driveway. I fixed the sprinkler head by the pool house that Brooke complained about twice. I watched him come and go, my own boy, 30 feet away, and I did not say one word to him. He walked right past me twice. The first time he lifted 2 fingers off his coffee cup at me, the way you do at anybody. The second time he stopped, and he goes, "Hey, appreciate you getting to that sprinkler." And I said, "No problem, sir." And I kept my head down, and he went in the house. You want to know what 31 years of service gets you? It gets you the ability to stand in a driveway and say, "No problem, sir," to your own son. I went back to that motel, and I did cry that night. There it is. 58 years old, face in a bath towel so the people in the next room can't hear it. But here's what I got in those 3 weeks. I got Brooke on the back terrace telling somebody the prenup was, and I'm quoting her, handled, and that Nathan's lawyer was a golden retriever in a suit. I got her yelling at Rosa, the housekeeper. Rosa Villarreal, been with Nate 5 years, sweetest woman in Georgia. She'd bring me a Gatorade out to the yard because she said I looked like her uncle. Brooke tore into her over a wine glass with a spot on it and told her she'd be gone the day after the wedding. Rosa cried in the pantry. I heard it through the window. That's when Rosa became my ally, and she didn't even know it. Because Rosa is the one who told me, in about 4 sentences by the trash cans, that the wedding was getting paid for out of something called Danvers Event Group, and that Miss Brooke had Mr. Nathan wiring money into it every couple weeks, and that Rosa had seen a bill for $185,000 for flowers. $185,000 for flowers. I'm the gardener. I go get the flowers. I know what flowers cost. That's not flowers, that's a hole with a bow on it. Dewey ran the LLC. Registered in Georgia in December, 1 officer, Trevor Danvers, and then Trevor showed up in person. 2nd Friday in May, 1 week out. He rolls in a black G-Wagon, and he's on the property like he lives there. And he does, near as I can tell, he's in the guest wing. He comes out to the pool while I'm skimming clippings, and he stands there watching me, and he goes, Hey, buddy, you missed a spot." I said, "I'll get it." He goes, "You know what she's paying you for, right?" I said, "Yes, sir." And he laughs and he goes, "Old man's not even gonna know what hit him." Then he says, "You want a beer?" I said, "No, thank you." And he stood there another second, and then he said the thing I've replayed 1,000 times. He said, "Be smart. Take the money. Guys like you don't get offered anything twice. Guys like you." That one I listened to about 40 times in that motel room. Now here's where it went sideways, because it did. This is not the part where I'm the genius who had it all figured. 6 days out, she made me. Not all the way, but close enough to just about kill me. Nate had a picture on a shelf in the hallway, an old one, me and Robin and him at Tybee Island, and I'm maybe 40 in it, dark hair, no gut. Rosa told me later that Brooke had picked that frame up and put it down and picked it up again. And that afternoon she came out to the yard and stood there while I was working, and she goes, "Dale, where'd you say you're from?" I said, "Hinesville, ma'am." And she goes, "Hinesville, that's by the base, right? Fort Stewart?" And I said, "That's right, ma'am. My daddy worked at the commissary." Which was a flat lie, and it came out of my mouth like water. She looked at me a real long time. Long. And then she goes, And she walked off. I don't mind telling you my hands were shaking so bad I couldn't hold the clippers. I had to sit down in the truck. And then 2 days later, Wednesday, 4 days out, Pete Nolan calls me, and he goes, "Dale, I gotta pull you." And I said, "Pete, no." And he goes, "She called the office. She said she didn't want the old guy on the property during the wedding week, said the guests would see him, said he makes her uncomfortable. She threatened to cancel the whole contract and the wedding day setup. And Dale, that setup's $31,000 to me. I got 12 guys. I got a note on 2 trucks. And I sat in that truck, in the Kroger lot, and I felt the whole thing come apart in my hands. 4 days out. I'm off the property. I've got a recorder full of a woman's voice and a marriage license from Alabama, and no way in that gate. That's the low point. That's the bottom of it. I honestly thought about calling Nate and just burning it all down badly, which is worse than not at all. Pete called me back an hour later. He'd been sitting with it, same as he sat with that biscuit, and he goes, "Dale, Saturday morning I've got 12 guys and 4 trucks going through that gate at 6 a.m. for the setup. Nobody counts 12. He said, "I'm not putting you on the crew. I'm just not gonna notice you." Pete Nolan. I'll say his name every time I tell this. Pete Nolan, Chamblee, Georgia. Now the last piece was the hardest one, because it involved Nate, and I only got one shot at him. Thursday night I called Charlene and told her everything, and she screamed at me for 20 minutes about how insane I am, which is fair, and then she got quiet, and she said, "Dale, he's going to feel like a fool, in front of everybody." I said, "I know." She said, "Are you sure that's what love looks like?" And I said, "No, Charlene, I'm not sure of one thing in this world, but I'd rather he be a fool for a day than a mark for 10 years. And Charlene said, "Then he needs 1 minute alone before it happens. Don't you do that to him cold." She was right. She's always right. It's exhausting. So, Saturday morning, 6 a.m., 4 trucks. I go in behind the tent poles. Nate had a 5:30 tea time habit he's had since he was a kid. He can't sleep before anything big. And at 7:15 he came out the side door in a t-shirt with a coffee to look at the tent, because he can't help himself. He's got to check everything. And I was standing there, in the green shirt, and I said, "Nathan." And he stopped, and you know what got him? It wasn't my face. He'd walked past my face twice. It was his name. It was hearing his name out of my mouth, and I watched 33 years go across that boy's face in about 2 seconds. And the coffee cup came down slow, and he said, "Dad?" I said, "Son, I need 6 minutes. 6 minutes, and then I'll leave if you want me to." He said, "What are you wearing?" I said, "I know." I said, 6 minutes. And I gave him the recorder. I'm not going to tell you it was clean, because it wasn't. He listened to about 90 seconds of it standing up, and then he sat down on a stack of folding chairs, and he listened to the rest of it sitting down, and he didn't look at me one time. He listened to her offer me $5,000. He listened to Trevor tell me guys like you don't get offered anything twice. And then I gave him the Alabama license, and the Bibb County plea, and the LLC filing with Trevor's name on it, all of it in a manila envelope from a Days Inn business center. He read every page. Took maybe 15 minutes, not 6. And here's the thing that broke me. He didn't argue, didn't say it's a mistake, didn't say you don't understand her. He just went gray and quiet, and then he said, real small, "She told me you didn't want to come." I said, "What?" He goes, "In February. She said she called you. She said you told her you couldn't get leave and you'd catch the next one. The next one." She'd been standing between us for 11 months. That's why the calls got short. She was reading my boy, a version of me the whole time, and I was 8,000 miles away and I couldn't say a word. And then Nate laughed, this awful little laugh, and he said, "The flowers." He goes, "Dad, I wired her $240,000 for flowers." And he put his face in his hands, and my son, who is 33 and owns a house in Buckhead, sat on a stack of folding chairs and cried like he was 9 years old. And I put my hand on the back of his neck, first time I'd touched him in 2 years, and it's the only good thing that happened that whole morning. Then he stood up, wiped his face on his shirt, and he goes, "Dad, go put on your uniform." I said, "What?" He said, "You heard me." He said, 400 people are coming here at 2 o'clock. My whole company's coming. Her people are coming. He said, "You've been on my grass for 6 weeks in that shirt. Go get your blues." Now I want to be careful how I tell this next part, because people tell it back to me like it's some kind of movie, and it wasn't. It was ugly and sad, and there were folks crying who hadn't done anything to anybody. Nate called his lawyer at 8 in the morning on a Saturday. Then somebody at the bank, then the venue coordinator, and told her not to cancel one thing. And I drove to Charlene's and got my Army service uniform out of a garment bag in her spare closet, where it had hung since her husband's funeral. And Charlene pressed the shirt while I stood in her kitchen in my undershirt shaking. And she didn't say a word, and she cried the whole time, and she still won't talk about it. 2 o'clock. 400 chairs on the lawn I mowed. My roses were in bloom along the front beds, the ones she called a graveyard. That's a fact, and I'm not going to pretend it isn't a little bit funny to me. I stayed in the pool house. That was the plan. Music starts, doors open, and Brooke Danvers comes out on the arm of Trevor, who is walking her down the aisle because he's her brother, and 400 people are watching a woman get walked down the aisle by her actual husband, and about 6 of us knew it. She gets to the front. She's glowing. She's got that smile, and Nate takes both her hands. And he says, into the microphone, because there was a microphone, he says, "Before we do this, I want to thank somebody who's been working on this property for the last 6 weeks. And that's my cue. I came around the corner of that pool house in dress blues with 31 years on my chest, and I walked up the middle of that aisle, and I have never in my life heard 400 people go that quiet. I watched it hit her. I want you to understand. I watched her run it. She looked at the uniform and then at my face. And I saw her put the gardener and the man in the hallway photograph and the 58-year-old with dirt on his hands all in the same place. And her mouth came open and no sound came out of it. That's the only time I ever saw her without a line ready. Nate goes, "Brooke, I'd like you to meet my father." Nothing. He goes, "You've met, actually. You offered him $5,000, and Trevor moved. He went for the side of the tent, and he made it maybe 11 feet, because Nate had 2 off-duty Atlanta officers standing back there since noon, and they walked him back into the middle of that aisle, in front of everybody with his tan and his slicked back hair, and his hand up going, 'Whoa, whoa, hey, this is a misunderstanding. Hey, Nathan, come on, brother.' Brother." He said brother to my son. And that's when Brooke's mother stood up. Real quiet woman in a blue dress. Nobody had paid her any mind all day. And she said, "Bree." And it came out like a groan. "Bree, honey, what did you do?" Bree. 400 people heard the bride's own mother call her a different name than the one on the program. Nate never raised his voice. Not once, and I don't know where he got that, not from me. He just stood there and he said, "The flowers were $185,000. I wired 240. The bank's already got it." He said, "And you're already married, Brooke. You've been married since 2018. You couldn't have married me today if I let you." And she cried. God, she cried, and it was good, and about 100 people in those chairs were on her side for about 10 seconds. She said my name. She said, Dale, please. Like I was going to help her. And I didn't say anything. I want you to know that. I had a whole speech. I'd written it in a motel room. I had lines in there I was proud of. And I stood there in front of 400 people with my mouth shut. Because the woman had already lost the only thing she was ever after, and there's no version of me kicking her that makes me a bigger man. She walked out. She walked back up that aisle by herself, in that dress past 400 people. And a Fulton County deputy took her by the elbow at the top of the driveway near where she'd crouched down to buy me. Because there was a warrant out of Bibb County she'd never dealt with, and Dewey Kessler had made a phone call on Thursday. Trevor got charged in September. The LLC money mostly. Last I heard he took a plea. Brooke, or Brianna, whichever you want, she's got a case pending in Fulton and one in Bibb. And Nate's civil suit got $110,000 back and the rest is gone, and it's never coming back. Nate says he doesn't care. I think he cares. You know what we did that night? 400 people went home. Rosa and 2 of the catering girls and me and Nate sat in that big kitchen and ate wedding food off the good china. Beef tenderloin. There was so much of it. Rosa kept putting more on my plate, and Nate had his tie off, and we didn't talk about it hardly at all. And then everybody left, and it was just quiet. That house is so quiet at night. You can hear the ice maker from 3 rooms away. And I sat out on those front steps in my uniform pants and my undershirt with my jacket over the rail, and it was that first real warm night in May where the air gets thick and the frogs start up somewhere. And I breathed out. Just breathed out. First time in 14 months, I think. Nate came and sat down next to me on the step with 2 beers, and he handed me one, and he didn't say anything for a long time, and then he goes, "The roses look good, Dad." And I said, well, they were dead when I got here. He's fine now. He's all right. He's not seeing anybody, which I think is smart, and he calls on Sundays, and the calls are long again, 45 minutes, an hour. He came down to Hinesville in October, and we ate at a Waffle House, and he drew something on a napkin, and I nodded like an idiot. Here's what I keep landing on, and I don't know that it's wisdom, it's just what I've got. That woman looked at me on my knees in the dirt and decided I was nothing. She wasn't wrong about what she saw. I mean, I was filthy, a man in a green shirt with a wheelbarrow. She was wrong about what nothing means. People will tell you exactly who they are the second they think you can't hurt them. That's the only time you get the truth out of anybody, when they've decided you don't count. So pay attention to how folks treat the ones who don't count. The gardener, the waitress, the kid at the drive-thru. Because that's them. That's the real one. The person they are with you is a performance they're putting on for as long as they need something. I lost 18 years of my son's life to the Army, and I don't get those back, and I'm not going to pretend some pretty lesson makes that even. But I got 6 weeks on his grass, and I got the truth, and I got Sunday nights back. I'll take it.